Hi, welcome, and thank you for joining us today for our virtual expo on physically distanced collaborative environments presented by Meteor Education. My name is Sebastian Sanchez, and today is Wednesday, May 27th, 2020, and we're very excited to have you here. While we wait for the rest of our attendees, I would like to share with you a few housekeeping items in regards to this Zoom webinars. Zoom webinar has a chat feature, which you will find on the bottom bar. And we want this presentation to be engaging and to also be interactive for you. So please feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentations. Just be sure when you are typing that you click on reply to all panelists and all attendees so that we can all see your questions. Also, this webinar has a raise your hand feature, and this alerts us that you would like us to enable your audio. So if you prefer at the end to ask our panelists any questions using your audio, just click the raise your hand feature and we will unmute you. Lastly, Zoom webinars makes the attendees muted by default, and we like it this way just as a courtesy to our presenters so that there are no background noises throughout the presentations. So with all of us being at home at this point in time, background noises are inevitable and unavoidable. So with that said, I would like to pass this to our other host, Ruth Bruss from Meteor Education.
Thank you, Sebastian, and thank you to everyone that's attending today's virtual expo on physical distance collaborative environments. We have 3 guests today. Each guest will share their expertise on the elements that impact classroom design and how to really maximize safety in a classroom while still allowing for student collaboration. So first, I'm going to ask our first 2 guests to give us a little information about themselves. We're going to begin with Dr. Paige Detman. Welcome, Paige.
Oh, thank you, Ruth. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon. I am Paige Detman, Chief Education Evangelist at Meteor Education. As my title indicates, I am an educator and always will be an educator. My career spans 30 years at different levels as a district executive, building principal, and teacher. I am passionate about empowering deep learning through teachers' innovative pedagogies that enable curious and inquiring students. In my role at Meteor, I support our studios across the country in the field, working with districts and schools on connecting high-impact instructional practices in high-impact learning spaces. Our goal at Meteor is to support educators in connecting their learning spaces and their learning experiences to achieve elevated levels of student achievement, student engagement, retention, and attendance. I'm here this morning talking with my colleague and good friend Russ about maintaining healthy environments. So we're going to be sharing our thinking with you. Russ, could you tell us about your background?
Sure, thanks a lot, Paige. I'm Russ Nagel. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Operations for Meteor Education. I've been with the company just 1.5 years, but before that I spent a number of years in the manufacturing and the supply side of the school business. And in that role, I've been able to visit and work with hundreds of districts across the country, working with them to develop products from the prototype to a production phase that would enhance students' and teachers' experiences in the school. And that's been really exciting for me. It's something I've enjoyed a lot. I decided to make the switch over to Meteor because as a supplier and a manufacturer, you're limited to the areas where you can help and make a giant impact. And with Meteor, we're able to impact so many more areas than I would ever be able to do from a supplier side. So it's been exciting for me to be able to work on these new areas and find new and innovative ways for us to be able to influence and help students in their learning environments and improve everything for the teachers and faculty. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to get to work with Dr. Detman, who ironically was also one of the districts we worked with as a supplier, and we got to work together to develop some really, really cool products for her students, which was a great experience. So thank you.
Yes, Russ.
We are really excited to hear from both of you and learn from your experiences. For those of you who maybe didn't hear at the beginning, we want to remind you that our participants can, if you have any questions, you can put them into the chat box and we will ask Paige and Russ and Jeremiah when he's on to answer those questions, as many as we can get to at the end of their presentation. So let's get started. Paige and Russ, take it away.
Oh, thanks, Ruth. Russ, I was just going to say, I'm excited to be partnering with you today on this.
Well, I'm excited also, Paige. I think it's going to be a great day. And I think the first thing that we need to start with is we just need to make sure that everybody understands that what we're talking about today are ideas. And this has to be a conversation and a collaboration even amongst ourselves, because we certainly don't know where this is all going to shake out. I think if you look at the progression of this pandemic, when we first started, there was a lot of talk that masks were really no help and we shouldn't be wearing them. And now, as we all know, we're all wearing masks, even if it's a bandana, because it's shown to slow the transmission of this situation. You know, the key here is that we have to be flexible. We have to be willing and able to roll with the punches and figure out what's going to happen next. And frankly, that's going to be different. It's going to be different by state. It'll be different even within regions of the state, and even sometimes down to the district level because of the different things that are impacting them, the type of experience they're having with COVID-19 and everything that goes along with that. The other thing that really plays into this is your students themselves. What you can do with different age students is going to be different. Can you really expect a kindergartner or a first grader to participate a lot in their protection and making a safe environment where you can count on maybe the older kids helping and being a part of that? Could they even properly wear a mask if masks were available? Would they know how to do that? And then, of course, the things that go along with that are as the kids get older, they can take care of themselves and their own hygiene. So while we consider the distancing, and we do have to consider that today, we also have to look at the key elements of the classroom experience. We have to make sure we're not giving up the collaboration. We have to make sure that it's not just a holding point for the kids, that we're continuing the excellence of the educational experience. And Paige, I know you have been doing some really great groundbreaking work on this, and I know everybody's going to be excited to see what you have. I know I've already seen it, and I think they're great, so I can't wait. So without anything further, let's jump into it with you, Paige. Thank you.
Sure, let's start right in. We understand that districts and schools are facing unprecedented challenges as you determine how to return to school and in creating the least risk for students and staff in the physical school spaces. What we hear from districts with whom we work is that they want to bring students back into smaller in-person classes, especially the elementary with 10 to 12 students per class as a consideration, and groups of students who remain together and don't really mix with other groups of students. Students will be well served in this environment to remain 6 feet apart. And one of the things to bear in mind is that we can rearrange furniture in beautiful classroom layouts to 6 foot apart and still retain the opportunity for collaboration, physically distancing, socially collaborating. So our goal today, Russ and I, along with our Meteor family, is to provide thought starters to help you continue the innovative pedagogies that are so beneficial in preparing global citizens to be ready for the 21st century workforce. So we're going to show you that we can physically distance students 6 feet apart and continue with in-person collaboration and communication. As we think about rearranging spaces, classroom spaces, we think about guiding principles. We call these principles educational adequacy criteria for classroom learning environments during COVID-19, identifying characteristics that will support our environment design during this pandemic. Russ, you're a guru of safety for us here at Meteor. Could you start with these guidelines?
Sure. First of all, from a safety standpoint, I think it's really important to keep in mind that we're not just talking about the physical safety of the students here. There's also a social and emotional safety and making sure that kids feel comfortable and it's just a good space for them. And that's going to require some adaptation, you know, being able to adapt the spaces. And of course, that includes the mobility of for flexible instruction. How can we rearrange things to make it adequate and to make it work well? Especially when you're looking at different learner mobilities and multiple modalities. You know, do we have to have a presentation? Are kids collaborating on a screen? You know, Jeremiah in a little bit is going to be talking about how different things such as computers and different other sort of high-tech things can work together to help kids with that sort of thing. So we want to pull all these together and make sure none of this is lost under the guise of COVID and make sure that we can maintain that.
Other considerations are that we continue to give kids dynamic ergonomic seating and standing options, because that's so important to get oxygen to the brain for learning. Our other guest from Dell is going to be talking about integrated technology. But as Jeremy talks about that, we know that technology can allow our students to collaborate, as some are currently in virtual classrooms from home. Some of our instructional pieces that we're looking at in the rearrangement of classrooms is teams of 2 to 4 students being arranged proximally in quads to promote that communication and collaboration that they have come to find so beneficial in consolidating understanding about the concepts that they are learning. We also want our kids to have the opportunity to engage in authentic inquiry as partners and teams, as they ask questions and find answers, and have access to resources and technology through defined pathways within the room and in the hallways. And then all of this promotes ownership of learning. So space design that allows teams to think together and solve problems certainly helps them address complex areas of interest. So we want to begin with showing you one of our spaces that was designed for a client for 26 students and primary kids, grades 1 through 3. So you can see these desks and tables are arranged in groups of 4, and that guided reading table at the bottom of the picture and the rug for group gathering are spaces that are used during the day, guided reading, guided math, calendar, time, etc. So our request was to rearrange this classroom to serve 12 students and to think about physical distancing. So this classroom is designed for 12 students using the desks and the tables that were currently in the classroom. When we look at this classroom, we find that we have 3 circles around the 3 different groups of 4. And that's the next slide that will show those 3 groups of circles. And you can see the desks at the top right, those are all 6 feet apart. So those kids are more than 6 feet physically distanced, yet they can communicate and talk to one another that far apart without disturbing the other groups. When we look at the bottom 2 groups using the furniture that was currently in the room, back one slide, that the table on the left of the Clover table is 48 inches in diameter, and the wave tables on the right are 54 inches in diameter. So they don't quite provide the 6 feet that we're looking for, and we're going to give you a solution to that in just a second. When we look at the mobile storage that's in the middle, and on the next slide, those have green boxes around them, and those are storage units that we place between the kids. Now they're physical storage units only, they're physical barriers only, but we know kids that are used to collaborating in class are going to think, and until they get used to staying in their group of 4, that they can go and talk to the other group about how they're solving problems. So this mobile storage promotes a barrier, access to the resources, but also a physical barrier to remind kids that we need to stay together. Here we have a one-way walkway in the classroom around the rug and out, which is accessible, and that provides that opportunity for kids to stay 6 feet apart as they're walking in and out of the classroom. Those desks and tables that I talked to you about there at the bottom might want to consider tabletop dividers for them so that there is a COVID-19 type barrier available for the kids. Russ, could you tell us about those solutions, the tabletop divider solutions?
Sure. If anybody's been watching any of the news from overseas, you will see that a lot of the overseas schools have come back with dividers between the students and things like that. And you can see just some options here. And the things to keep in mind when you're looking at these dividers is what is the purpose beyond just containing any germs or sneezes or anything of that nature? Because do you want a visual barrier? Because you can have clear so that the kids can see each other and that the teacher has good visibility. You may want something that is writable so that kids can put their work on that and make sure that they can write their stuff so other people can see it. Or you might want something that is not visually clear so that you have the ability to separate the kids and have different distinct areas in your district. So looking at that, the other key feature here, in my opinion, is you probably don't want something that permanently mounts to the current desk or the current surface that you have, because when there comes a time that we don't need these anymore, you certainly wouldn't want holes or any sort of permanent marks in what you have already there. So finding something that clamps on or that sits on with gravity or some other sort of non-permanent type of affixing it to that is probably going to be your best solution to that. There are also some that can be taken apart and stored flat so that if they were ever needed again, you could get them back out. So those are just some of the different features that you want to look at so that you're not just buying something, you're investing in something that you can use not only now, but you can take it off later, and it's something that you'll be able to have the flexibility to use in the future for other circumstances if you want.
So in addition to the tabletop barriers, we added a couple of other things to the classroom. That is a hand sanitizing station and a hand wash station. And when we look at the pathway in and out of the classroom, with that, we can see that there could be a stop on the way into the classroom as well as on the way out of the classroom. Russ, tell us about those two products.
Yeah, this is something that there's been a lot of innovation, especially even in the last 90 days on, one of which is a hand sanitizer system where you put in an appropriate hand sanitizer and it's touchless. So all that you have to do is wave your hand under it and it will come out. I particularly like, especially for the littler kids, the ones that have a capturing the basin below it or something that's going to keep it from going on the floor if they miss their hand or something like that. These are easy to replace. The cartridges and the replacement containers are available, and it's just something you can set up practically anywhere. And as you can see in the bottom right, there's even some that you can put some great ideas and, you know, hygiene type of things, as well as making them mobile in case you want to move it around. And then in addition to that, if you want to go to the next step, there are mobile hand washing stations. And we all know that a lot of classrooms don't have plumbing, don't have sinks and that sort of thing. So this is sort of the next step. These do require a little bit more of attention because you have to fill up the water buckets for the fresh water, and then you have to contain, obviously, the drain water as well. So it is going to require probably your maintenance staff to be able to empty those and refill them and things like that. But there are options that go along with this that really can give you a lot more flexibility in the rooms if you actually want to get to the point where there's actual hand washing going on. So those are just a couple of the new and innovative things that are available that can help with this sort of hand washing. And as I think we've probably all heard, at least 500,000 times, hand washing and sanitizing is probably the single best way to prevent the spread of coronavirus and COVID-19. So these are some things to certainly think about.
You're sure right, Russ. I even get directions on some of the company websites from how to wash your hands. And I have an RN for a daughter who reminds me frequently. Let's move on to an upper grades layout. This was actually designed for grades 4 through 8, but it could be a high school layout also, because many of our high schools do use these products and products similar to this. This was designed for 28 students, and it actually has 2 doors in this classroom. And so we wanted to show you a one-way in door and an outdoor. So there's an indoor and an outdoor and a pathway around the middle that keeps the kids 6 feet apart. So there are 3 designed spaces for students to collaborate. These are the 3 desks options, and all these students are greater than 6 feet apart. Additionally, there is a soft seating option with the 2 armless chairs, tablet arms, and 2 other soft seating products that are also 6 feet apart. Each one of those groups that we have showed you are more than 6 feet apart from the other groups. We also have put our mobile storage again between the groups for that physical reminder of our kids that we're going to stay within our own group. And then the double tables, the double wave tables in the middle are there just to promote that walk around opportunity and physical barrier. It also could be used for a student who has a product to work on or a project to work on there. So, Russ,
so
could use room dividers too.
Yeah. Right. You know, a lot of the spaces may not have mobile storage. It may be millwork around the edge or something like that. So you may not have that flexibility to put something like that there. Room dividers are an option. There's pros and cons to these. These are all certainly mobile, so they can be moved around wherever you need them and reconfigured and things like that. Like with many things, there's marker boards available, there's tack boards available. There's a lot of different surfaces that you can use for this. And, you know, what we would just like to point out for this is if you're looking for a more definitional division of the space, and you'll see that a little bit later, there's a couple of other examples of where these can be helpful. But if this is a great way just to more physically divide up the space, especially if you have kids that are curious or that they don't really have a good sense of that spatial awareness and staying away. This just makes them stop and think a little bit. So there's a lot to be done with that. And as a matter of fact, the one with the orange and white in the bottom left page, I believe that one was even in the last slide as part of the initial product. Is that correct?
We're going to talk about those mobile whiteboards. Magnetic whiteboards actually also are so much used for visible thinking with kids, especially for brainstorming. But we'll point that out as we go along. The next environment we want to share with you, again, is designed for 12 students. And it was around a question with one student per table, could we create 3 groups of students in a classroom? And so our wonderful designer Ming measured out that we have more than 6 feet for each of these groups of students in the three rounds. So when we look at this, there are 3 sets of 3 with the tables, and then there is one soft seating area in the top right corner. That soft seating area also is more than 6 feet apart, which allows kids to clean their area and to move to those soft seating area where they could collaborate with the teacher or collaborate with one another, maintaining that physical distancing. So at the bottom, you see a red box. That red box is an air purifier, which Russ is going to talk to you about.
So one of the things that we hear a lot of is, you know, this is obviously, it's a respiratory virus. That means it's airborne. And we have a number of products that are available that actually have HEPA filters, multi-stage filtering that are very, very good for small spaces, large spaces. There's a lot of options. They can be hardwired in, they can be plugged in. But the thing that I think is really cool about these is that they're really very smart. They will tell you how many particulates are in the air, if their filters need changed, what the efficiency of what they are doing is, and they will even slow down if the air has been fully purified. So it's a really great way to take a look at that. And the thing I will point out, because I think it's really important, is it has been shown to do up to 99.97% of airborne germs and pathogens, but nothing has really been tested to COVID yet because it's so new and the testing is so stringent. You know, what it will show you is, though, that similar pathogens and similar sized microorganisms, it would be over 99.97% effective at that. But you can't make that claim specifically for COVID, and I don't want to do that. But I will say all of the initial anecdotal reports are very good on this, and they are in the process of doing the testing. And this is something that's really cool because there's mobile units for smaller offices, wall-mounted units, and it can really be sized to fit the need that you have for the space you have available. And this is just something I think is going to become really important and critical for the health and safety of our kids moving forward, even beyond the COVID outbreak.
Thanks, Russ. That's very helpful to understand that. We have another table or desk shape to show you. And on these desk shapes fit in 3 different ways. We think that this is the most collaborative way because students are looking at one another eye to eye, knee to knee, and there is no hole in the middle for when they want to use manipulatives or engage in a collaborative hands-on task. The soft seating at the side is also 6 feet apart. These tables, as they are sitting now, the side-by-side partners are 6 feet apart and the cross the table partners are 8 feet apart. When we look at, and we can fit more than 3 groups in these classrooms, we just wanted to maintain maximum space. And one of our principles is designing to the edges, so that we're using the edges of the classroom to house the students, because then there's 1 or 2 walls that is providing that safety border around the kids. These are the other 2 ways that these desks can be configured. And while I probably wouldn't advocate the bottom left in a normal setting, that does provide more distancing if we want to use it in another place. And we present that option to you because we want to share about a cafeteria. Our cafeterias right now, we fill with kids, and there's a lot of proximity to kids, one another. And it might not be something we want to use. In fact, the districts I'm talking to are going to feed the students in the classrooms or some other way than in the cafeteria. So this arrangement of this cafeteria had the 4 desks that are collaboratively placed together, along with other tables and configurations around the outside. Looking at the next slide, that is a redesigned or rearranged internet cafe. It's not for eating, but if kids need to use the internet to work virtually on some of their work to get caught up, that is the place they can do it. They can use an internet cafe like they do a Starbucks cafe. But we also wanted to show that each of those round circles is 6 feet. 6 feet in diameter, and place those round circles strategically to show that the tables are more than 6 feet apart, and the kids are much more than 6 feet apart at the round tables. We also thought this could be an additional classroom when we're running out of space in our current classrooms. If we're downsizing the numbers, this could be a classroom at a minimum with 3 separate groups of students and a teacher. The serpentine shapes down the middle are there for soft seating, for student and teacher discussion, and the yellow seats are all greater than 6 feet apart, both across and side by side. There are those magnetic whiteboards that Russ was talking about as dividers on the room divider option. And we placed them strategically here in this space to not only divide tables or divide groups, but also to be used instructionally and learning wise for collaboration. All right, in this internet cafe, in these classrooms, we wanted to make sure that kids had hand washing stations, had the Purell stations, I'm sorry, whatever they're called. And Russ helped me.
Sanitizing.
Sanitizing, there we go. And the air purifiers that are spaced around the room. So as we look at how do we get kids in and out safely in a large space like this, we looked at coming in the sides and out the middles, just creating a flow that allows student movement. Because one of the things is learner mobility, and we want to make sure that students aren't sitting in one spot all day long, that they can move from a set of 4 in a table to one of the serpentine areas, so that they do have the opportunity to stand. All of these tables are height adjustable. Kids can stand or they can sit, but they still maintain their physically distancing need while they are socially collaborating. So Russ, we have some technology options also.
Yeah, so as we get into these rooms and you're using rooms differently, and you might even be using different spaces that you normally would use, the chances are that you may not have power where you need it. And, you know, Jeremiah is going to be talking a lot about this automation and how do we power it up. Granted, some of it is rechargeable, but we all know that things need recharged, and probably one of the best ways I know to make sure there's no physical distancing is to have a bunch of kids hovering around a plug trying to charge something up when they have spaces. So this is an option where you can literally run power anywhere in a room. It's incredibly flexible from the standpoint of spacing and timing. It'll run up to 30 different devices at one time. The main key to this is that it would only run the devices that have a 12-volt converter. So a laptop, a notebook, an iPad, something like that. It's not direct 120. It's anything that runs off of a converter. And this is an incredible way to be able to rearrange a room to make sure your kids are physically distant and to make sure that everything is set up properly for your kids and the safety. This is all incredibly safe. It's UL approved. You can move it at the drop of a hat. If your needs change tomorrow, you can rearrange that and then go from there. So it's really quite cool. It works well.
Yes, it provides great opportunities to enable the space to function at a higher level with the use of technology, integrated technology for collaboration. Glass walls, Russ.
Well, glass walls are something that honestly I think are going to be probably less used than any of the other options, but it's still something to consider. And this is something for more permanent. If you think you're going to be a long time and you're going to need a big space divided up, glass walls really offer a unique perspective. They don't require construction. They don't require any permanent mounting. You can set them up so that they only are on the floor, but you can take it up and not leave any marks behind. They're very flexible. Glass is a very clean substance. It's easy to clean off. And in these cases, you wouldn't be going all the way up to the ceiling so that you really wouldn't have to change your lighting or your air conditioning or your sprinkler system or anything like that. And in most cases, I can't speak to all jurisdictions, but in most cases, you do not have to have an inspection and things like that because it's not floor to ceiling. So that's something we'd have to research for you, but it is a way to physically divide up a space more on a semi-permanent basis, and it's something you might want to consider, for example, in that internet cafe or a big space like that.
Could be a really good option there in that internet cafe.
Right. So everything we've shown today is currently available. We can get them for you. Most of them have pretty good lead times right now and things like that. But there are some trends and some wild cards that it's worthwhile to talk about. One is antimicrobial textiles. There's a lot of talk about antimicrobial surfaces and antimicrobial textiles, all that goes along with that. The thing to keep in mind is that if you have a product that's got multiple finishes and multiple different materials made up of it, if one thing or the other is antimicrobial, if everything else isn't, you have to be careful not to get pulled into that. For example, copper is naturally very antimicrobial. If you had a chair and the mesh on the back and the seat were copper, that part would be antimicrobial. But keep in mind, if you have plastic or rubber arms, that wouldn't be. So you want to make sure to keep that in mind. We do also think you're going to see an increased use of individual cubbies and places where students can put their own things and have them just be available to them. And then there's a really cool new technology that's really just being researched right now, which is a UVC light, which is a near field light that isn't harmful to your eyes, but it is a very, very good disinfectant, and it works well to kill a lot of germs. So we'll certainly be keeping you posted as those things come up. But for right now, we wanted to go over just things that we can practically do right now. And Paige, I'll let you wrap up your part, and then we'll say a few words and go turn it over to Jeremiah.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you joining us today, and we hope the ideas that we have shared provide thought starters for you as you're looking at rearranging environments to maintain healthy spaces for all users in your schools. We have spaced seating and desks 6 feet apart when feasible, and then we have options for tabletop dividers and other barriers when needed. Students are sitting on one side only of desks and tables in most of our rearrangements. And the dining halls, as we know them, can change to internet cafes as well as additional classroom spaces. So we appreciate your time to join us and look forward to answering your questions. Russ?
I just want to say thank you very much also. We appreciate it. We're excited. We're here to help. I'm sure there's a million questions, and rather than me talk, let's get to those and we'll see what we can do to help you out.
Well, thank you, Paige and Russ. Great information. And we do have several questions, so I'm just going to throw them out And Paige, Russ, one of you can take on the answers. One of the questions was, how available are the dividers? If I were to order them in a few weeks, would they be here by the start of school?
Most of the dividers that we have shown are readily available. They are in demand, of course, and it would depend on if a few weeks is really a week and then when your school starts. If you wait a few weeks and your school starts like the 7th of August, that's going to be tight. But if we can work with you and figure out what you need and your school is a mid-August, get it done quickly, yes, there are options that we can get to you before the start of school, and we would be glad to do that.
Perfect, thanks. There was another question for how big square footage were the classrooms, Paige, that you all designed? What was the square footage?
They were 850 to 950 square feet.
Okay. We had a middle school question. They said, what would a science lab look like? They have lab tables right now. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it would be rearranging the lab tables, or it depends on the type of lab tables. Some of them are very heavy, as Russ can attest to when we kind of changed out the school he worked with me on. But we would be happy to support that person in thinking through what that science classroom might look like. And we'll add that to our next iteration of rearranged classroom designs.
Yeah,
So
I think one other thing real quick on that, Ruth, is that labs are usually done with partners and they're usually in pretty close quarters. I do think that there'll probably have to be a rethinking of lab partners because most of those are set up for teams to do. So I do think that would have to be in consideration as well.
Absolutely. I think that answered another question that they want to know if there's more than 12. Paige, you said that would be something that you'd look into.
Well, and absolutely, some of those classrooms could have another group. And one of them, we showed soft seating in the corner, which could be for more kids, but it could also be another group of 4 desks or 4 tables. So those classrooms would have fit 16 kids easily.
Okay. We've had several people say that they've heard that the CDC recommendation is that students are all just facing each other in the same direction. And of course, the designs that were shared were not showing that. How do you account for that? Is that something that would not meet the criteria or still would meet the CDC criteria?
Well, CDC criteria on their modified layout says space seating and desks at least 6 feet apart when feasible. And then it says on another bullet to turn desks to face in the same direction rather than facing each other, or have students sit on only one side of tables spaced apart. And so we have students sitting on one side of tables and desks spaced apart more than 6 feet.
Perfect. And we have time for really one more question. If we have other questions we didn't get answered, we will address those, or you can send them to us at the end and we'll make sure that Paige and Russ get the answers that they have. But can you speak to the sound that the air purifiers create, Russ? Are they loud?
Well, the ones that we have are multi-speed air purifiers. They are some of the quietest in the market. I don't know if decibels mean anything to anybody, but 72 decibels is the loudest it is when you're right near it. And that's actually very, very quiet. So what it depends on is it's like a fan. How much air does it move? The more air you need to move and the more you want to recirculate it, the little bit louder it is. But certainly if they don't need to be right next to a student, you can put them in an area where you have a little bit of distance. And the ones that I've seen and heard, and they're very, very quiet. And there's a number of them out there that are quite a bit louder. The ones that we showed today are very quiet. And since it's the last question, I'm going to cheat just a little bit because I saw a couple people, I think it was Mrs. Schumacher on here, mentioned about cleaning and bleach cleanable fabrics. What I would say is the one area of the CDC guidelines that's been, I think, pretty good is if you go on there, there's an entire list of cleaning products that work for different materials that have the active ingredients in it. It's not necessarily by brand name. So if you're concerned about cleaning, and a lot of fabrics actually can be cleaned. I saw some things about soft seating. There's a lot of those materials that can be cleaned. I would just do a little bit of research on cleaning because there's a number of different products out there that can have a good effect on different types of materials.
That's okay. That sounded great, Russ. Thank you for cheating on that because I want to make sure everyone gets their questions answered. And we'll definitely make sure if there are any other questions come up. Thank you, Russ. Thank you,
Sure.
Paige. Great information. So now we're going to go to our third guest today, Dr. Jeremiah Frink from Dell Technologies. Dr. J, so can you tell us a little bit about yourself to the participants?
Sure. So, my position at Dell as a senior education strategist, I support education myself across the Northeast, our team across North America. And really our focus is looking at how do we transform education? How do we rethink teaching and learning? Obviously using technology as a catalyst, but not always centered right there. My background, I was a classroom teacher, an administrator, director, 20 years in public education, 5 years now supporting public education here at Dell. So that's who I am.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We know that you are out working in schools left and right across the country. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, it's been interesting as we work across the different places. I mean, it starts with this emergency remote learning. So often people talk about that distance learning. And you can see that I have some different ideas on that next slide there, where we look at some of the conversations that we're looking at around this. Blended learning's popping up, cloud tools, video collaboration, more home involvement, student ownership is increasing as well as their engagement at times, to be clear. There's a focus on skills that wasn't there before as a recognition that what is the core essential piece of what I'm doing. And then probably the biggest piece right now that everyone's talking about is that equitable access. How do we make sure that students anywhere can still access the teaching and learning that's happening? So it's really interesting how this has generated a whole set of other conversations and things that people are looking at and considering.
Absolutely. So with all these changes, how do you encourage collaboration with students when they are distance learning or they have those physical barriers?
Well, and I think sometimes we need to remember that collaboration is different than just talking together, because students will always talk and interact. It's the job of the teacher to design for learning. And what you see here is often what we think about, and as we saw in the chat in our earlier conversation, they think of back to school, they think of this, 6 feet taped off. And as we already saw previously, really it's different. And if you begin to look at what is collaboration, and you can see that on the next slide, we have a survey that was taken by the journal, THE Journal, and they listed here are the ways that educators think about collaboration and the activities of collaboration. And when you look at those, that's the question that I often talk to educators about. How do you take what you're already doing? What does brainstorming now look like when you're physically distant? And that's where technology obviously can start to come in. There are tools that allow for quick ideas to pop up, and then even to gather those and for students to start to comment on each other's or vote on each other's ideas so that they get upvoted for a classroom discussion. So you can kind of see the technology begins to facilitate that conversation that's already happening.
So has COVID-19 changed your message for collaboration?
So when you mentioned that this might be an interesting conversation to ask, and actually if MJ, you'd hop 2 slides there, that would be great. Because what we're looking at is when we think about encouraging that collaboration and changing our message, really it's the same thing. You start with the design, and we always talked about designing a learning ecosystem, right? So it's the physical pieces and the way those interact. And often technology facilitates that. So you look at who are the people, what's the type of interactions and practices you want, and then what are the resources you have. So as you begin to think about that, and go ahead and flip over, MJ, the next piece here is to say, here's what our message was before. Technology allows us to shift from a model of teaching and learning that was dissemination, just as Paige and Russ showed how you can design for that physically, we can also design for that technologically to begin to inspire that discovery of learning. And so what we look at that next slide is you say, so how do you design with learning at the undersides of that? And you need to begin to think differently in terms of What are some of the key pieces I need to do with the technology? I need to be able to post information. I need to have some way to share documents. I need to be able to organize some of the learning for the students. I need a place for them to interact, but not a whole group all the time, but to break apart. And different tools allow you to do that so that you can get into those small group collaborations. I heard mentioned earlier the virtual labs idea, or the lab issue that comes up. And we've seen some districts with full remote go to virtual labs. That's one solution, but once we're maybe able to get back into the physical space, as Russ pointed out, so often those are pairs. Well, what if one pair was doing the work, the other, which typically when you have a pair is taking the notes, is virtually, is coming in through a camera right on their laptop. And we've already seen that happen in the past as well when we had students who are medically fragile and they were able to dial in. So you begin to see that if you take that, design your learning in the best way possible, and then add the resources and the technological solutions that could help facilitate it, that's where you start to really move forward. So let me just say, Ruth, so my message hasn't changed. It's the same.
Good. That's what I was going to ask you. So what are some of the suggestions you have for that then?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we do have to address is, and this isn't easy for anyone, right? We're in a tough situation. You know, the questions you're asking of the physical piece are so appropriate, but honestly, how are we going to figure this out? This is insane. We had schools that were packed before, and now we have to double the space or triple the space between them. So I just challenge us all to think about what are the design assumptions that you already have in place. For example, when you think of collaboration, we usually think of this, a live setting. I've done collaboration back when I was working in school districts around the world, and time zones meant that we had to do asynchronous collaboration. So you'd have students posting at one time a video that they would record that others would record back with. And now we have the technology we didn't have back then that we have now, things like Flipgrid that allow very easily to do that type of video reaction and interactions. We look too at the aspect that a lot of times we think that we need to have people talking. Well, when you look at a classroom, you begin to think about there's a sound issue. So being allowed to just chat and have a back channel is what we talk about a lot of times. So addressing that design assumption that a collaboration is verbalizing. It is important. I don't want to say it's not. We got to realize though that we have to make some adjustments as we move forward to still do what's best. And so really I ask two primary questions. What are those practices and interactions you want to see in the classroom? And then what's the flow of creating, producing, and sharing to do that? And you need to think about during the class, over time, between groups, and even across multiple spaces. And I think this comes up to what Paige was sharing earlier as schools are asking, what about these hub areas? Can we redesign those and think differently? And so what some schools are doing is looking at, well, maybe what we have is a large screen monitor or a large format display. It's called different things, set up smaller, you know, not huge that's in the front of the room, but smaller all around the outside perimeter of these areas. And then students would be able to listen in, see the teacher, have the teacher in the classroom while there's one group out in this more public hub with the divisions, the 6 feet, as you've already seen already, but they're still able to engage through the technology in a way that you couldn't otherwise. Otherwise, they're just sitting at home or some other option like that. So they're looking at ways to use the technology to create these hubs and recreate those. Another thing that I've seen in conversation that we've used in the past for students who maybe had some issues with hearing other students, even when we were collaborating, is that everyone gets into a shared chat type space so that within a group. And then you use something like we see Sebastian up there that has the earpiece and the microphone right close to their mouth. And then the students can hear each other, even though they're 6 feet apart and there's another group who's 8 feet across from them. And it's a solution that's come up so that you can have voice amplification by having that shared virtual space.
That is some great information, Jeremiah, and I could talk to you all day on. I'm sure there's lots of questions that might be filled in again in the chat box if you have any for Jeremiah. But I'm going to ask you one last question because I know that this is on everyone's mind. Are there any safety issues for devices that you might want to share with the audience? Because every child has a device of some sort. Would you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so obviously what we've been talking about is the health safety aspects of just be careful, make sure things are wiped down. But I want to get into some more specifics, thinking in terms of you want to make sure the digital security. I see in the chat one of the questions, people are forcing streaming of video and such. It doesn't always have to be video. In fact, people get tired of video. So
Yes.
go with just the audio if you want to hear the voice, or just the chat type feature, but still recognizing that these students now are engaging in a virtual environment. So you need to make sure whatever tools you are using have been vetted through, thinking in terms of student data privacy, thinking in terms of that there isn't a way for them to be ads and such are popping up on them and such. So going through that same process still needs to be there in terms of keeping their security, and we need to think about that. One of the pieces too, when you're thinking about this safety issues, thinking about some of the security type aspects, is to think about your equity and your support. So it's very easy, as we saw again in the chat, to say, hey, send everyone home and we'll just connect. Now, we had to do that, right, in this first iteration, but we better learn from this first iteration as we move forward and say, you know, there's some students that the home environment isn't the right environment necessarily for them. And there are some concerns there. Or maybe there's 5 kids, that's how many I have in this house, 5 kids who are all home trying to work at the same time. Do you have access? Do you have connectivity? And all of those items come into play. Now you'll see where the safety comes in. Great, I'm on a Zoom session, and now I have other people walking behind me who are now being broadcast out. Another suggestion that schools have been thinking about is the teacher's in the room and she is sharing out and being broadcast to students who are remote. Okay, but now you've just made so that any student in that room is being broadcast out into this class setting. And that home environment is now coming into the classroom as well. And you really have some of those security things that we need to think about. And I'd say to kind of finish it out is something that Russ said at the very beginning is let's start with making sure that it's a safe in terms of the social and emotional aspect. We can think about some of these other things that we really need to do. And by having some good training, making sure we have a strong digital citizenship framework, having some of those practices that we learn as a staff on how to do. But if our focus is not around the safety of the students in terms of feeling that they are safe in a safe learning environment, learning is not going to happen. And so setting some of those, and you can use digital technology to do that. Fun videos, do little scavenger hunts, do some different things using the technology that allows the student's voice and their energy to be a part of the conversation so that they can feel present, socially present, even if they're physically distant.
Wow, thank you so much, Jeremiah. Sebastian, were there any questions for Jeremiah in the chat? I know he got to one on his own.
Yes, there was another one from Rhonda, and she wanted to know if you could please expand on your thoughts on community library books from the school library.
Okay, so community library books. So using the community library to be able to then have in the school setting, is I'm guessing what the question is?
Jeremiah, if I may, I'm guessing she's concerned about the transmission of the virus from the paper and the books. So I think that the main thing right now, until there's near field things that will disinfect that, I think time is the best thing. I believe the longest that the virus is known to live on paper is 7 days. So, I mean, granted, if somebody goes in and pulls books, I think if you reserved a book and it hadn't been checked out and it was like contactless delivery and it had been there for over 7 days, I think you would be very, very safe doing that. I think it would be more of the handling from day to day type of thing.
And what we're seeing too is using the systems that most libraries have to order it, like you're seeing with food and other things, just as you said, Russ, to reserve it so that then you can pick it up. And then in terms of just hitting the digital piece, and Paige saw you wanted to jump in too, many are looking at how do you then invest in digital content. And it is an investment and it costs money. And we have to recognize that. There is open education resources that are out there, and there are resources out there that are being created, but just not enough for the amount of resources that we really need to do well with our students.
Thank you. Thank you. Paige, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, well, we've got another question to answer, but I was just going to add that we're all working together to figure this out. And the administrators that we're talking to are very concerned that they do what's best for their kids, do what's best for their teachers and all their staff. And we're here to join you in that pathway. Any way we can help to support you in that journey, we're here. We do believe so strongly that we need kids to have the opportunity to engage in problem solving together. And that's a pathway we're going to figure out together as we move forward. So thank you, Ruth.
Well, thank you so much to all three of our guests for talking about that physically distanced collaborative classroom and environments and all of the things that we have to consider. Thank you, Dr. Detman. Thank you, Jeremiah Frink. Thank you, Russ. We really appreciate all the information. It's really helpful. We are recording this, so if you do need a recording of this, I put my email on the chat and you can copy that down. Or if you have additional questions, anyone in the audience that we weren't able to get to in this hour, go ahead and send them to me and we'll make sure that we get you the answers that you're looking for. Our next virtual expo, I just want to give a plug, is June 24th at 3 o'clock. Our guests will be STS and esports. And our topic is going to be about driving engagement and participation for our students. So look for the flyers in your email, invite your friends, and we hope to see all of you attend. Have a great afternoon and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.